Hey, everybody, welcome to the very first episode of my brand new podcast called Brittany Unfiltered. Thank you so much for joining us. This is actually a brand new project. It's something that we just started, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this, why I started a new project. This is something that we've kind of been teasing for a while and has been coming for a long time, and I've wanted to do for a really long time, but it's something that I didn't have the space for or the ability to do for a while, and now I do. So very excited to be launching this. It's going to be awesome. We're going to be trying to do this at least once a week to start with, and it's going to be a little bit longer form than things that I've done in the past. If you follow my work, you know I do a lot of shorter videos, and those are a ton of fun. But this is going to be something that allows us to get a little bit more in depth onto certain topics and to talk about things that I otherwise don't typically talk about. So very excited that you're here with us. And again, I'm going to get a little bit into that towards the end and a little bit more about this project. But today, actually, it's weird because we've been planning on doing this project and this podcast and starting Brittany Unfiltered for a while now. And it's something that I wasn't really sure how it was going to go, and wasn't really sure how in depth we were going to be able to get into certain topics. And then today, one hit that is actually really close to my heart. And I'm going to try to get through it without getting emotional, because this is the one topic, the only one out of every topic that I talk about where I will actually get emotional to the point of hardly being able to speak on it. There's a lot of subjects that I get really passionate about. This is the one that it actually gets physically difficult for me to talk about. And that is the subject of abortion. Today, obviously, in terms of late-term abortion, and babies that survive abortion. It's been all over the news. If you only get your news from mainstream media, you may not have heard about it, but I'm betting that you probably have. It's been all over social media. And that is that the Senate last night actually voted down a bill that would have legalized and mandated protections at the federal level for babies born alive after failed abortion attempts. Okay, so we're not talking about babies at 6 weeks who can't feel pain. We're not talking about, babies that were born after an abortion and were born deceased. We're talking about viable babies born alive following failed abortions. So babies born alive. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about babies actually coming out of the womb alive and being left to die with no medical care. And this is something that has been actually coming before the Senate a couple of times. They finally held a vote on it yesterday and got everybody on the record as saying whether they supported it or didn't support it. And we didn't expect it to pass. It needs 60 votes in the Senate to pass. Republicans do not hold that great of a majority in the Senate. So it's something that I kind of knew it was going to end up this way. I kind of knew that there was no way that this was going to get past the Senate because of the radical abortion stance on the left. We're not talking about a Democratic Party that considers abortions to be safe, legal, and rare anymore. We're talking about a very militant segment of the abortion lobby and the lawmakers who are behind them. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise when I woke up this morning, but that didn't make it any less heartbreaking. It actually took me several hours to be able to write on the subject, just to be able to form cohesive thoughts around this, because frankly, I don't know how you feel, but I can't imagine that in 2019 America, where we can perform surgeries on children in utero, where we can save babies earlier than we've ever been able to save them in the history of mankind, where we know more about childbirth, we know more about pregnancy, we know more about the science behind conception than we've ever known in the history of mankind. And yet we are still having a discussion about whether or not it should be illegal to A, murder a child, that is clearly and scientifically proven to be a child, and B, whether it's okay to try to kill that child, and then if that doesn't take, to let them die on a table without medical assistance. That's an actual conversation that we are having in 2019 America with all the technology that we have, with all the medical science that we have. That's something we're still discussing. So the fact that this is even a topic, much less a partisan one, that people are having disagreements on, is that in and of itself is baffling to me. And I have no explanation for it other than sin exists in the world. Evil exists in the world. And the root of all of that is selfishness. A selfish desire to get what you want no matter what. And ultimately, that is what this comes down to. So when I finally accepted, I guess, in my mind, that this was something that we needed to talk about, then the question was, okay, how do we talk about it? What is there even to say to a society that is debating this issue, and to a side of the aisle that has accepted this as, or considers this to be acceptable, to even have this discussion, and then to come down on the side of infanticide, to not be able to vote yes to a bill that would make it illegal to murder a born alive child. And as many of you know, my husband and I are actually expecting our first, and we're going on about 6 months pregnant now, due in June. And I think this has always been a topic for me that has been very dear to me. The abortion issue is the single issue I tend to get upset about when I talk about it, because to me it's not like universal health care, right? It's not a topic about whether something is a good versus a bad idea. It's whether or not something is good versus evil, is right versus wrong. It's probably one of the most black and white issues you can possibly talk about. So it's become even more that way since I became pregnant, and since the subject has become real to me in a personal way that it never was before. So I thought about this a lot. I struggled with the words and how to address this issue. And I actually found myself, without even really realizing it, without intending to do this, I found myself sitting in the room that we've set aside as our son's nursery. It's got cardboard boxes in it and little pieces of furniture and some clothes that we've bought, and like one pack of diapers that we have, and we're still getting it together. But we put his rocking chair together over last weekend, and I found myself sitting in it, feeling him kick, which he does all the time. He's incredibly active, and trying to wrap my mind about how to address the issue of how we have gotten to this point as a society where this is something that we're debating. This is something that we're talking about still. And one of the things that I kept coming back to is the rampant hypocrisy of the left, and the fact that they have spun a narrative now for, if you go back to Roe v. Wade, almost 50 years, but in reality, even longer than that, to try to push why abortion is necessary, why abortion is needed, why you're evil if you don't support it, why you're against women and against women's rights. And the fact that in the last few weeks, you've seen this narrative fall apart. And it's not anything that Republicans have done. It's not even anything pro-lifers have done. We've been very active in presenting our side of the issue. But this is something that the left has done to themselves. And I'm going to talk about it here in just a minute. We're going to take a really, really quick break. But I want to talk about how the left is actually dismantling their own argument to the point where we don't even have to do it for them. And they've done it in such a clear and concise way that I really don't see how you could possibly miss it. So we're going to talk more about that in just a second. Take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hey guys, welcome back to Brittany Unfiltered. As we were talking about right before the break, we're talking about the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which just failed in the Senate yesterday. The reason it failed was because 42 Democrats plus 2 independents, including Bernie Sanders, voted against it. Only 3 Democratic senators voted in favor of the bill. And again, first of all, one of the things that we have to address here that I think is incredibly important, and it's something that has really been brought to my attention a lot on Twitter today, is that people don't actually know what's in the bill. People don't realize why it's important, and there's been a lot of arguments about why the Democrats didn't support it that are completely and totally wrong. It does not take a rocket scientist to figure it out. It's very, very simple. So first of all, what is in this bill? So this bill gets a lot of comparison to a 2002 bill that was passed and signed by then President George W. Bush that is similar in name. It was the Born Alive Act, and it's the original 2002 bill is very, very different, but it's pointed to as a reason why Democrats didn't vote for this bill yesterday, because they say, oh, well, we don't need it because we have this 2002 bill that already does the same thing, so this one is unnecessary. That's not true. It's not true. In fact, all of these bills and all the text of these bills are right there on Congress's website. You can look them up, you can read them for yourselves, and you can use your brain and your eyes to figure out why these two things are different. So the main difference is this. The 2002 bill, very, very short. Not a whole lot was in it. And essentially all it did was it defined a born alive infant that survived an abortion attempt as a person. Okay, that's essentially what it did, as a human person. And the goal was to ensure medical protections for that child by defining it as a person. If it's a person, you now have to give it medical care. You have to treat it as a person. Unfortunately, this bill did not do 2 things. First of all, it did not specify what kind of medical care had to be given to an abortion survivor. It left that completely open-ended. All it did was say this is a person, and it kind of assumed that the same medical care would then be given. That's not true. That doesn't happen. The second thing that it failed to do was it failed to include criminal penalties for doctors who failed to provide medical care for these children. So there really weren't any consequences for doctors that completely disregarded it or chose not to give life-giving medical care. And again, another argument that you will kind of hear is, well, we don't really need that because that doesn't happen. Again, not true. If you've been paying attention at all, you know that there are abortion survivors, including one named Janet Jensen, who have actually spoken before Congress in support of laws like this, in favor of laws that protect children that are born after an abortion attempt and survive it. There are documented cases of this. There are people living today who survived abortion attempts. It's also been well documented that the abortion industry has a history, they don't really like to talk about it, of when these things do happen. Of course, the goal of an abortion is to make sure that whatever comes out is not alive, right? It's been dismembered, its heart has been stopped, it's been poisoned. Whatever method they have used has done the job, and by the time you get to that point, you're not left with a living infant. So when you have a botched abortion, it has been well documented across multiple cases. Do a quick Google search. You can find link after link after link to documented medical cases where infants have been born alive following an abortion and have either been left to die by being denied medical care or have been murdered after the fact, as was the case of Kermit Gosnell. If you remember that very famous case, he ended up getting prosecuted for murder because he was actually he was killing infants and cutting their necks after they survived botched abortion attempts. So this is not something that doesn't happen. Okay, you don't have to be on one side of the fence or the other to recognize that there are documented cases where this does happen. So it does need to be addressed. There's also kind of this argument that, well, these late-term abortions are incredibly rare. Nobody actually has them. Abortions after the point of viability don't really happen. Even when they do happen, they're in cases of extreme fetal anomalies or life of the mother. Again, total and complete crap. The CDC has estimated that roughly 13,000 third trimester abortions are performed every single year in the United States. 13,000. That's enough abortions. That's enough aborted babies to fill up half of the LA Chargers stadium out in California. That's how many are done every single year. It's also been estimated, and it's hard to know precise numbers on abortions because there's no official tracking method, but it's been estimated that only about 0.5% of all abortions are done in the case of fetal anomalies, when the baby is diagnosed with something the doctors say it's not going to survive, or it's going to have a horrific quality of life if it is born. Well, 0.5% of all abortions equals about 5,000 abortions in the United States every year. So you've got 13,000 of them that are occurring. And you've got 5,000 of them that are occurring for medical anomalies, okay? Or supposed medical anomalies, fetal anomalies. So that leaves over half of all late-term abortions are being done voluntarily. They're being done electively. The Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-abortion organization, by the way, this is not an anti-abortion, this isn't LifeSite News, this isn't Live Action, this is the Guttmacher Institute. They said on their website that the vast majority of late-term abortions are typically obtained because the woman either changes her mind or because she had trouble accessing abortion earlier on in her pregnancy, whether she couldn't get to a clinic or she couldn't afford it. She had trouble accessing abortion, or she has found herself the victim of domestic violence or a tumultuous relationship. So there's something in her situation that has changed and has brought her to seek an abortion later on in her pregnancy. These are not fetal anomalies. These are not medical conditions in which a woman's life is threatened. These are elective abortions done in the third trimester. And there are 7 states plus Washington, D.C. that actually allow elective abortions up through the 9-month, and that does not include New York, which just passed a similar law, or other left-wing states that are currently pushing similar laws, okay? So that's where you can obtain abortions like this. It's already happening. So these are kind of the arguments that the left likes to use to sort of downplay this issue. Why it's not a big deal, why we shouldn't be talking about it. It's so rare, it barely even happens. It's only in the case of certain anomalies. There's already a bill that, that prevents you from murdering a child after it's been born. None of these are true. They're all very easily debunked. It does not take a lot of research to figure out that these arguments don't hold any water. Here's another argument, though, that doesn't hold any water. And they've done this to themselves. Over the last few weeks, with the addition of states that are pushing 9th-month abortion laws, abortions all the way through the moment that a woman is dilating and going into labor, as the delegate in Virginia liked to push, abortion laws like New York State's, abortion laws like the ones that Illinois is trying to push, that Massachusetts is trying to push, combined with comments from people like Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, who openly advocated for infanticide after a baby is born, that there would be a discussion between the doctor and the mother as to what to do, coupled with the fact that you now have 44 senators who have voted against a very common sense bill that simply says you cannot murder an infant once it has been born, proves single-handedly one thing. And that is that this has never been about a woman's body. This has never been about a woman's choice. It's never been about reproductive rights, about her bodily autonomy, about her personal decision to occupy her own space without it being invaded by another person. This has nothing to do with the woman at all. Now, this is a mantra that they have used for decades to push abortion. If they can take the spotlight off of the child and put it solely on the woman, then she becomes the center of compassion. She becomes the only one that society should feel compassion for and the only one that has human rights. She becomes the focus, and that's what they want the focus to be on, is it's all about the woman. And the baby kind of becomes collateral damage. It's talked about in a dehumanized fashion. It's a clump of cells. It's a blob of fetal tissue. It doesn't have rights. It doesn't really exist. It kind of just becomes... It's set to the side. It's all about the woman. Now, by admitting that they want abortion to the point of infanticide, to the point of not defending unborn children after they are born, after they have no impact whatsoever on the woman's body, on the woman's health, they are entirely at this point separate from the woman. The fact that they are advocating for killing the child or denying it medical care at that point proves that this has never been about the woman. Your body, your choice no longer holds any water if your body is no longer in play. If your body is no longer a factor, if your health is no longer a factor, if your reproductive rights are no longer a factor, because at this point you've already reproduced, right? The result of your reproduction is laying on a table gasping for air. So it's no longer about your right to reproduce because you've already done that. That ship has sailed. That's done. Now it's about what to do with the baby that was born alive when it wasn't supposed to be. Hey guys, welcome back to Brittany Unfiltered. First episode of this podcast. We've actually been talking about a really heavy subject, as a matter of fact. Been talking about the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which failed in the Senate last night. And as you can probably tell, it's something that I get very passionate about. I hope you do too. I hope this matters to you. I really, truly do, because at the end of the day, you know, we can debate about a lot of things, all right? We can debate about how much money we should spend on this or that. We can debate about, what type of border wall we need, or even if we need a border wall. We can debate how high taxes should be. But at the end of the day, if life doesn't matter, if the sanctity of life doesn't matter, nothing else really does. It doesn't matter whether or not you have the right to bear arms, or the right to practice your faith, or the right to speak, or the right to a free press. It doesn't matter if you have all the rights to these things if you don't first have the right to life. That is where it all starts. That is the fundamental, pivotal cornerstone of all of our other rights. We have all of these rights because we have inherent dignity, because we are human beings, because we are alive. So I hope that you care about this issue. I hope this is something you're passionate about. It's one last thing kind of before we wrap up here. One thing I found really interesting over the past few weeks is the Marist poll, and hopefully you've seen this. If you haven't, this should be headline news right here. A Marist poll has been asking for the past umpteen gazillion decades about this abortion issue. And they ask the same exact way, the same exact wording every single time. And one of the question is, are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? Which do you identify as? Typically, the vast majority of Americans say that they are pro-choice. They say that they believe that abortion should be legal at some point. Right? Most of them are largely pro-choice at the beginning of a pregnancy, the first trimester, when things are very, very early on, and many of those abortions are done through induced miscarriage. Those numbers go down in the second and definitely in the third trimester of whether or not Americans think that abortion should be legal at that point. But the vast majority of Americans have historically come out as pro-choice on some level. For the first time in over a decade, the Marist poll found that the same exact number of people responded that they are pro-life as responded that they are pro-choice, 47%. This is a huge swing of 10 percentage points in just the past few weeks. So it's very clear that this radical abortion agenda that wants death for infants up through the 9th month of pregnancy and even beyond that, should they survive, is not resonating positively with the American public. Americans don't want this. They find it heinous. My inbox and my Twitter feed are filled up with people saying, hey, look, I'm pro-choice up to a certain point, but I can't even get behind this. This is horrific. This is unimaginable. So I think that the left has really tipped their hand here. I think that they have exposed what they have always wanted. And not the entire left. I want to be careful here because I don't believe that the vast majority of self-described leftists or self-described Democrats actually want this. I think that there are a lot of people on the Democratic side of the fence who find this abhorrent, who find this just completely unpalatable, that we're talking about children through the 9th month of pregnancy and children that had been born alive following a botched abortion. But I think that there is a segment of the radical left, a segment of the radical progressive left that has always wanted this, that has always believed this. Because after all, this is a problem that is actually, this isn't new. Babies have been left to die following botched abortions before this. It's just now coming to the forefront because radical leftists are starting to codify it as perfectly okay, perfectly legal. So this is something that they've wanted for a long time, but they've now kind of tipped their hand. They've now exposed it. Now we know what they want. And they're being very honest about it. And it's not resonating well with the American people. So I hope that this is something that you're passionate about. I hope that this is something that you hold your legislator to account for, that you call your legislators and your senators. And if you live in a state that's pushing something like this, that you hold them accountable, because this is something that if we have anything to get upset about in this country, it should be this. It doesn't get more heinous than murdering infants after they're born. It's bad enough that we do it before they're born, but the fact that now we're talking about doing it after they're born is unconscionable. So I hope that this is something you care about. I hope that you learned something through this. Real quick, just about this podcast, and I said at the beginning of it that I was going to talk just very briefly about what we're doing here. Like I said, this is Brittany Unfiltered. This is a brand new project for me. I've wanted to do this for a couple of years now, actually. But as many of you know, if you followed any of my work, you know that actually my husband is in the military. We lived out in San Diego for a while in this teeny tiny little apartment because that's pretty much all anybody can afford out in San Diego. And we simply didn't have the space to do it. There was absolutely no room to do something like this. So this is something that we now have the ability to do. But I also wanted to stress that this is a completely independent project. I do a series called Reality Check for MRC TV, which is a division of the Media Research Center, and that's my day job, and I absolutely love it. This is a longer form project that will allow us to get a little more in depth into certain subjects. There's a lot of things at MRC that I can't talk about. And it's no fault of theirs, but the Media Research Center is a 501c3 organization. It's nonprofit. It exists off of donations. So we're actually prohibited from talking about candidates, about political elections, and about certain elements of legislation and decisions that have yet to be made. There's a line that we have to toe. So there are a lot of times where I'll get emails or I'll get letters saying, why aren't you talking about this? Or what is your opinion on this election or the result of this? And people, I think, don't realize that it's not that I don't want to talk about it. It's that I literally can't. I legally can't, at least not for that platform. So by doing this and by having something that's a little bit longer form and something that's completely separate, not related to the MRC at all, this is something I do completely on my own with my own time, my own equipment, everything. This enables me, it frees me up to be able to talk about a lot different things, to be able to help answer some questions, but then also to get into the meat of some subject a little bit more, beyond what Reality Check allows me to do, which is just kind of a 3 or 4 minute video on a specific topic. So I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too. We're going to try to do this, like I said before, at least once a week to start with on Tuesday nights. So definitely look back for it. Very, very excited about it. Excited to have you here. Thank you so much. Please give me your feedback. Send me any questions that you have. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining me.